The John LeBanc Show has been known to make people laugh, sing, think, scream, throw things in rage, and generally lose their minds. Listener discretion is advised.
Worldwide and out to the greater universe, you're listening to the John LeBanc Show.
Well, folks, we're continuing on with the best 100 albums of all time with our good friend Derek Shelmerdine. We killed 60 minutes like nothing, and we barely made a dent.
That's right. And there's just so much good music. 18 was the Doors' debut album. It's the only one of the Doors albums that actually makes the cut from 1967. This sold 4 million copies, and it really established the Doors as one of the major West Coast bands, along with people like Jefferson Airplane and Country Joe and the Fish. That was a great era for music. That was a great genre of music, I think.
Yeah, that was 1967 when that came out.
That's right. Yeah, Light My Fire and a bunch of other great tracks on that particular album.
Which was 122 weeks on the charts, which is, again, that's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's 2 years, over 2 years.
Yeah. I mean, it just shows that a lot of these bands that established themselves then went on to have a very, very steady sale of their records. It's probably why they, became such an established band, because they, of course, only ran up until the very beginning of the 70s. Jim Morrison, lead singer, died. 27, one of the 27 clubbers, and the band itself carried on without him for a couple more albums, and before they actually disbanded in the early 70s.
Yeah, it wasn't a few years ago they tried to do a reunion tour, and I think it was Ian Astbury sang for them. Am I right about that? Yeah.
They're another one of these bands that would really benefit, I think, from getting together again.
After that, we have number 24, the Beach Boys with Pet Sounds, 1966.
That's one of the classic albums from the 60s. It was very much an influence for Sgt. Pepper. Paul McCartney's often said that Pet Sounds is one of the albums that's influenced his thoughts on Sgt. Pepper, because McCartney was one of the real drivers for the Sgt. Pepper album, and it was the originally as well, the follow-up to Pet Sounds was going to be an album called Smile. It was Brian Wilson's masterpiece, and it was a very, very complicated album. And they were his idea was very much along the sort of Good Vibrations thoughts, with multi-layering of sounds and lots of complex arrangements. And the problem was that the rest of the band, the other Beach Boys, weren't so keen. They thought, one, it would be very difficult to play on stage, and was just overly complicated. So he actually abandoned that particular album, and it became one of the great sort of lost albums of the 1960s.
And the Beach Boys in themselves were kind of this own little flavor of rock music, rock and roll music, that really influenced the whole beach sound, right? The whole surfer sound.
Yeah, that's where they came to prominence with the whole surf thing in the very early 60s, when the music was looking to sort of replicate the sound of the waves and the crashing of the waves as you surf. But they were very successful over a long period of time. I mean, Brian Wilson famously had a nervous breakdown And Glenn Campbell actually filled in for him on tour for about 6 months before he went off to his own solo career. But they've had a really good career, I think, the Beach Boys, and they've had quite a number of different people through the band at different times. But they've made some great albums.
Number 27, ZZ Top Eliminator. Now that's interesting. That is a very good album, but top 50 seems a little high for this. But there's what Sharp Dressed Man and a lot of that good stuff was on there.
Yeah, I'd agree with you. I think that, I mean, they're a good band. They've actually been going a long time. I mean, they're one of these bands that comes out. You think of them as an 80s band, basically. But I mean, Barry Gibbons started out in the mid-60s in a band called Moving Sidewalks. And ZZ Top did their first ever gig in 1970, 10th of February, actually, 1970 in Texas. So they're one of these bands that, beavered away for a long time before they found success, like people like David Bowie and Mark Bolan. I mean, they were trying to get themselves into successful bands right throughout the 60s, and neither of them made any serious headway until the 70s. It's funny, really, how some people find pretty immediate success, and other people can be at it for years before they really find that success.
Exactly. Willie Nelson was really late in his career when he finally hit it big.
Yeah. I love Willie Nelson.
Yeah, Willie's just great. In 1969, we have the number 66th album on the list from Chicago Transit Authority.
Yeah, that was when the band was actually called Chicago Transit Authority. It was their first album, and it's got an awesome version of Spencer Davis's I'm a Man on the album. It's actually, I think, even better than Spencer Davis's version of it. It's a great album. And they decided after that first album to shorten their name to Chicago, and they went down the very imaginative route of just having numbers for their albums.
And the later on in their career, they became more of a pop band than they were early on in their career.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, they went really quite mainstream as the sort of albums progressed. They've been very successful, but a much more lightweight version. I mean, if you listen to that first album, they were a solid band at that particular time. I mean, again, just listening to I'm a Man, I mean, absolutely superb. If we were talking about 100 singles or songs taken from albums, that I'm a Man would certainly be Chicago Transit Authority's version would certainly be in my top 100.
Definitely, it's a great song. Up next, we have Peter Gabriel with So, 1986. He's at number 92.
I know. That's a guy that should really have been up there a little bit higher. I mean, perhaps even with his band. He was the original singer with Genesis.
Exactly.
And he was with them until The Lamb lied down on Broadway, which I think is a great album. I always liked that. It was one of my favorites, certainly from his era, Genesis albums. And that itself should have been in there, I think, possibly.
Yeah, the funny thing about Genesis and Peter Gabriel is they seem to... the split was better for both in popularity.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Because I was never a big Genesis fan. They were always classified as prog rock, but to me they were a little bit on the lightweight side for prog rock. But when Phil Collins joined, they became much more mainstream, and I think you're right. I think that was good for them. And Peter Gabriel actually going off on doing his own thing, I think was a lot better for him. So I think you're absolutely right there, John.
Yep. Another person that was on their own, and with the band, of course, though, but on her own, Janis Joplin. Pearl, 1971, 4 million copies. That's at 94.
Oh, that's right. I mean, one of the real cornerstones of the 60s, Janis Joplin, effectively started out with Big Brother and the holding company. And one of the all-time, I think, great female singers. Unbelievable voice. But she actually died just as they were recording this particular album, Pearl. And that was how she came to be discovered in the hotel. She was late for a recording date. They'd laid down the previous day the musical tracks for Buried Alive in the Blues, and she didn't turn up for the recording at the studio. So one of the roadies went over to check at the hotel, and sadly she died. Which is why Buried Alive in the Blues is actually an instrumental on the album. It was never intended to be. It's just that they left it as it was.
Kind of a tribute to her.
Absolutely. But I mean, she was an awesome band. She was nearly the lead singer for 13th Floor Elevators, another Texas band, because she's from Texas. And they invited her to be lead singer, but she declined and headed off to, San Francisco and joined Big Brother. But they beaved away for a good year before finding success at Monterey, that we talked about recently. And it was there that certainly it established her reputation. She came back for that second set on the Sunday, I think. Record contract followed, and she never looked back. Though I don't think she was ever a happy lady.
You know, you find that with a lot of musicians, even though they're following their dreams, they never can find that happiness that they were searching for. That's
right. I mean, maybe that's one of the things that gives people like Janis Joplin the edge when she's singing, because she's got that sort of inner feeling coming out into the songs. But she's certainly always been one of the people I've always really, really liked.
Mm-hmm. So before we move on, Brian Wilson's on tour.
That's right. I mean, this guy, there's no stopping him now. I mean, he had a nervous breakdown. He stopped touring, and then he sort of picked it all up again. But at the moment, I mean, he's a great guy. He's got some shows between the 15th of July and the 25th of November, and that's across America, Italy, Israel, UK, Germany, Ireland, and back to the United States. But the shows, he's doing two versions of the show, basically. So it's best to check, as they say, before you buy your tickets, because you're either going to see him perform the Pet Sounds album, or a completely different night out where he does Greatest Hits Live. And I thought that was a really interesting concept, a sort of two tours in one idea.
Yeah, and especially with more of the older bands, they seem to have a set that they just play on tour, and they don't vary too much from that set. And this would be nice if you can catch them maybe twice in a short time period and get both sets out of them.
Oh, that would be an awesome couple of nights out.
He's doing some Christmas shows, right?
That's right. I mean, come the 28th of November, he's doing a Christmas show with Al Jardine, and that's only in the US, and that runs to the 23rd of December. So he's obviously got three completely different shows that he's touring, well, two of them simultaneously, followed by sort of 3 days after the first couple finish. He kicks off with the Christmas shows. I actually think that would be a good night. That would be a really good Christmas thing.
Exactly. Chicago's on tour as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, they're in the USA and Canada, 23rd of June to the 16th of September. So they'd be fun to see.
Now, we brought up Meatloaf. They were at number 30 with Bat Out of Hell. That was 1977. That sold 4 million copies. And then number 43, Queen, A Night at the Opera. What a great album.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's the one that has Bohemian Rhapsody as one of the tracks. I was actually surprised that Queen only had one album in the list, and Zeppelin had 7 albums on the charts.
Right, being how vastly talented Queen is, and the songwriting. I mean, at least every album had like one really great song to it. But it is a little surprising that Zeppelin had so many comparatively to just one with Queen. And comparatively, only 3 million copies for the album that had Bohemian Rhapsody on it, one of the most iconic songs of all time.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's interesting when you look at various aspects of this. It's some of the numbers that were sold. I mean, that one looks really low, and then you look at something like Hotel California, and that sold 16 million. And you'd have thought, I mean, it's a great album, obviously, but the sort of disparity between 3 million for Night of the Opera and 16 million for Hotel California, which I'd have thought would have, if I hadn't known, I'd have thought they'd have probably sold around about the same number.
Yeah, if you just had a guess at it, that would be a good guess, and you'd be totally wrong.
Yeah.
Queen is on tour, by the way.
That's right. Yeah, they're with Adam Lambert still, and they've got some gigs coming up in Europe at Belgium, the UK, and Ireland, and that's the 29th of June to the 8th of July. And then they do a residency in Las Vegas from the 1st to the 22nd of September. So if anybody's planning to go to Vegas, September would seem to be a good month to choose.
Don't go anywhere now.
John will be right back right after this.
Yes, he will. Check out the new book from Derek Shelmerdine,
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It tells the story of rock and roll from its roots right up until the mid-'70s punk.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Not just the music, but also the events that shaped the music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
It includes the backgrounds to recording sessions, singles, album releases, births and deaths, epic concerts, and festivals.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Shelmerdine has made a painstaking effort to document pretty much every event that would prove significant in shaping popular music.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Purchase the book at www.rockandrollunraveled.com. Follow him at Twitter at R&R Unraveled, and look him up on Facebook at Rock and Roll Unraveled.
Rock and Roll Unraveled.
By author Derek Shelmerdine.
Available now. You're listening to the John LeBanc Show.
It's hydroponic radio for your brain, man.
Feel smarter yet?
Hotel California was at 25, but more Eagles related, Don Henley at number 44 with The Age of Innocence, and a second Eagles album at number 55, The Long Run. Again, the Eagles, what a great band.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, they dominated. I mean, they effectively started about 1970 and really finished at the end of the decade. I mean, they were one of the possibly the most successful 70s bands, basically. But they were great fun. I mean, they, like a lot of bands, they didn't all get on all of the time, and there were fist fights backstage and all kinds of stuff. And they split up at the end of the Long Run tour, and they swore they would never get together again until hell froze over. And then in 1994, of course, the Hell Froze Over tour opened, and that spanned the globe for a couple of years.
The album Desperado didn't even make the list.
No, sadly, I mean, my personal favourite Eagles album is Desperado, but for some reason it didn't sell very well at the time. It's never been a popular, by sales Eagles album. But I think it's a wonderful album.
Yeah, in fact, Desperado is my favorite Eagles song.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I just love that album.
They're on tour.
America and Canada, second half of the year, basically. Catch them from the 20th of June to the 11th of November.
But look at the lineup. Look at the lineup. It's a good lineup. They're not making up a lineup. This isn't a fake put-together lineup. Joe Walsh, Don Henley, I mean, they're all in the band.
Absolutely. I mean, you are seeing the Beatles and Deacon Frey, Glenn Frey's son, he's there as well. And the support acts. I mean, Jimmy Buffett is some of the opening. James Taylor opens on some. And Chris Stapleton, who I hadn't come across before. I discovered he was supporting them. So I'd listened to a couple of his albums, and they're really good. Really like them.
This is a tour, if you get a chance to see the Eagles, because we don't know how much longer we're going to see some of these bands. The Eagles are one band you definitely want. I mean, Joe Walsh, he's so awesome. Even on his own, he was awesome.
Yeah. I mean, it was Joe Walsh, really, with Hotel California that brought that sort of harder rock edge to the band. So the fact that he's out with them now, that would be an awesome tour to catch.
I've been waiting to talk about this band. You know, it's my favorite band. I'm about ready to explode. I've been working to get here. AC/DC, Number 15, Back in Black. I'd put that one in the top 10.
Oh, absolutely. That is a great album. Really is.
From front to back, like I was speaking in the first hour of this broadcast, Derek. From front to back, there's not a bad song on that album, and you put it on and you can just let it roll.
Yeah, and it was really the album that broke them into the really big time.
And the most incredible thing about that, if you ask me, Derek, they had just lost their lead singer, and here comes Brian Johnson, a relative nobody, and he blew the album away. I mean, it's just, not only was the music great, but the singer came in and he defined himself as not a replacement, but as a singular being, saying, "Hey, I can do this too."
Yeah, yeah, it is awesome when you think that that was his first album with the band, and it's the highest one in this list of 100 best albums of all time.
22 million copies sold.
Yeah.
For a band, here's the thing. For a band that there's not one pretty guy in the band, the guitar player runs around in a schoolboy outfit. AC/DC was just a band. There was no pretty there. They just had to write great songs.
Yeah, and some awesome guitar work on some of the albums.
Definitely.
Well, all the albums. Yeah.
So they have two other ones on the list. Arguably, they could be on the list or not, but Razor's Edge at number 72, that sold 5 million. That's got Thunderstruck. And then they have Dirty Deeds, which was really a best of unreleased material. So, when I read this list, I was like, I don't know if I'd put it there, because a couple albums that I feel are better than Dirty Deeds in particular. Highway to Hell, Derek. What a great album, and I can't believe that doesn't make the top 100.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right. Highway to Hell certainly should have been there. That was Bon Scott's last album.
Which, again, you can see that the great bands can put out album after album after album, 1 year after the other. They can do that.
Yeah, exactly, 79 and 80.
And I'd like to throw out there, it's one of their later albums, but Black Ice is such a well-written album for AC/DC, and it touches on little areas of music that AC/DC hadn't gone yet. I mean, he played a slide guitar on Stormy Mayday. You never heard that before for AC/DC.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the things about AC/DC is that, if you listen to the later albums, like Black Ice, they are excellent albums. They're still consistently really good and really well worth listening to. Whereas, some bands, they stay together just that little bit too long, and their later albums just either replicate what they've done before or tail away, basically. But I think it's fair to say, if you listen to the AC/DC back catalogue, I mean, it's all very, very strong.
Yes, every album they put out, even the less popular ones, have some really great music on it. They fell a little short after, I think it was probably the hype of Back in Black, and then following it up with another great album, For Those About to Rock, which probably should make the top 100 as well. They fell a little short for a few years, but when you're selling so many copies, it's hard to keep that momentum going, especially when from 76 to 1981, they were on the rise and just selling tons. So they fell a little short in the 80s, but then they came back with Razor's Edge.
Yeah. Oh, it's a great album.
And that features Chris Slade on drums, not Phil Rudd, which Phil Rudd is basically their mainstay as drummer.
That's right. I quite like the way that the guitar almost simulates a bagpipe sound at times on Razor's Edge.
Yeah, I don't know how they did the production there. You'd have to. I think that was Bruce Fairbairn that was the producer at the time, and the sounds there were very. Even though it was very AC/DC, it had a new sound for AC/DC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the opening for Thunderstruck.
No, that's great. And that's really a finger exercise. Most people don't understand that is a finger exercise, and he turns it into a song. What other band can do that?
Absolutely. That's brilliant. That's like Ravi Shankar getting a standing ovation at Woodstock for tuning up his sitar.
Oh, really? Who was that?
Yeah, apparently, I think it was Woodstock. It was one of the big festivals, Ravi Shankar, because sitar music had been made very popular by people like George Harrison and Brian Jones, and he was getting invited to all the big festivals. And I think it was Woodstock where he tuned up for about a quarter of an hour, and everybody thought he was playing something, and he got this standing ovation at the end of it.
Awesome. Unfortunately, we won't be able to see AC/DC on tour, at least for now, although I do hear they're working with Mr. Axl Rose on an album, so I would think that it won't be too much longer that we'll before we see them play live.
Yeah, they are saying that they are planning to tour again. As you say, they talk of albums. Phil Rudd's just finished a tour, but he's not on the road at the moment. But I dare say he'll be out and about again shortly.
The Cars, they have 2 on the list, number 52 at their debut album, The Cars, 1978. 6 million copies. It's nothing to slouch at.
Yeah, absolutely. And another 3 years on the charts, and 79 with Candy O from the following year, 78 and 79. I mean, they sort of popular American new wave. My Best Friend Girls, probably one of the better known songs on the first album.
Now we're getting into some more, I guess, on the heavier side, or at least at the time, Black Sabbath at 83, Paranoid.
Yeah, absolutely.
Think it could be a little higher?
Oh, I think that should be higher. I mean, it was recorded in one day, apparently. Absolutely incredible. And it was also on the Vertigo Swirl label in the UK, one of those very, very collectible labels. So you've got a sort of double bonus of having a very collectible label and a very awesome album, all in one package, as it were.
To me, one of the best albums of all time. It would definitely make top 50 for me. So I was actually a little bit surprised it fell to 83. But Black Sabbath didn't really. They were popular in the heavy metal scenes and all that.
Yeah.
But on the charts themselves, they really didn't gain any steam. And Paranoid being 71 when that was on the charts. That was in a time where that kind of rock was dominating, I guess, back then. But there was really nothing for them after, even though all their albums have just got some great music. I thought Volume 4 should be in the top 100, but of course that's not in there. But even their 13 album, the reunion album that they did just a few years back, if you listen to that, that is classic Black Sabbath from front to back. There's no bad songs on the album. It's like the old stuff, 8 songs, and they're just done well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Black Sabbath's one of these bands that really stayed in a niche market, as it were. I don't think they ever, as you say, really broke out into a sort of, greater popularity, as it were, like some of the other bands.
And that's because they were the first real heavy metal band, and it took 20 years for heavy metal to really get some major popularity, and we'll talk about those artists here in a little bit.
That's right. It's interesting how it's the only genre really that's broken out into sort of 70s metal, 80s metal, 90s metal. So it's and even bands that's in the list that one wouldn't probably call metal, because there are so many different labels you can put in it all now. Mm-hmm. But really, to a great extent, they really fall into the spirit of metal, as it were. But they were certainly one of the pioneers of the genre, no doubt about that.
The next band I want to talk about, they fell in at number 29 with Hysteria and number 33 at Pyromania, and that's Def Leppard.
Yeah, they're a really interesting band. Pyromania, the 1983 one, that was their third album, and it was the last one that they made before their drummer Rick Allen actually lost his arm in a motoring accident. I think it was on the way back from a gig on a New Year's Eve, I seem to remember offhand. Not quite sure if that's the case, but he certainly lost his arm in a car accident. And what's great is the band stood by him. You know, he was determined he was going to get back into the world of drumming. He had a custom kit made for him so he could play in a one-handed style. And the band stood by him and waited sort of 3 years while he got it all together. And then they released Hysteria, and it was a massive, massive success.
That's a long time for a band to be out of commission, 4 years, especially in the 80s when they were running through bands like crazy. Yeah. I'm talking the record industry, that they could come back and put in top Pyromania, which Pyromania is just fabulous. You can it's another one of those albums you can put in and listen from front to back, and you're always entertained, and you can sing along with the songs, and it's just awesome.
They're a great band.
And they're on tour.
Absolutely. All over the place. I mean, 1st of July to the 18th of December, they're in America, Japan, Australia, and then over in Europe, in Ireland and the UK. But they've got some great support bands. In America, they're supported by Journey. In Australia, they're supported by the Scorpions. And in the UK and Ireland, they're supported by Cheap Trick. So that'll be a great night out.
And any one of those supporting acts could be the headliner.
Absolutely. I mean, Journey actually pop up with their own feature in the Best 100 Albums. And as well as the Def Leppard tour, they've actually got a bunch of other gigs as well that they're doing, where they're headlining.
Cheap Trick, they are another band that's just awesome.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Now, Ozzy's on tour.
That's right. I mean, Denmark, Belgium, Poland, Germany, Spain, Portugal, Israel. A lot of bands are going to Israel, I notice, nowadays. And USA, and you can catch them between the 22nd of June and the 12th of September. He's another guy that is regularly out and about on the road.
Now sit your butt down.
The John LeBang Show will be right back.
And I promise you'll love it. Yes.
I'd like to take a quick second here to tell you about our new sponsor, Quality One Painting. For interior and exterior painting needs, call Tom at Quality One, 313-982-2986. Tom will give you free estimates, senior discounts, and I can tell you from meeting the gentleman, he's one of the nicest guys on the face of the planet. So for a quality paint job with a professional attitude, call Tom at Quality One Painting. That's 313-982-2986. 313-982-2986. Quality One Painting.
Hey, man, it's at the bottom of the hour, man. Do you know where your kids are, man?
If you want to contact the John LeBang Show, feel free to send an email to jlebang@live.com. And if you're on Twitter, look him up at John LeBang. And don't forget to go to his Facebook page at The John LeBang Show. Now here's John.
You brought up Journey, number 40, Escape, in 1979, 9 million copies.
152 weeks on the charts. So they're really featuring well. I mean, to get into the top 50 there, absolutely awesome.
Then we have Boston at 35 with their debut album, Boston, and at 63 with Don't Look Back.
I think they're one of these bands that helped to really popularize the whole AOR thing when it broke in the 1970s, the sort of whole move from AM to FM music. And that was the time when bands were really starting to play the bigger and bigger venues, the whole stadium rock thing. I think Boston were a big part of driving all that.
One thing that stands out about them is they had just a fabulous singer, and the songwriting, it was well thought out. It wasn't just writing a song. They thought about their parts, and you could tell they really structured these songs very well.
I think that's an interesting point in terms of the long-term success of bands is often determined by having good songwriting qualities in the band. I mean, if you look back to the 1960s and the sort of beat era of the sort of 62 to 66, the only bands that actually transitioned away from or beyond the beat era into the sort of rock era, into the second half of the 60s and into the 70s, were the bands that had songwriters, people like the Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks.
Mm-hmm.
They all wrote their own material. And you find, if you look at the bands around 65, 66, the ones that have been very successful for the previous 2 years, where they weren't writing their own material, they progressively just fell away.
When you have a good songwriter in the band, or a couple of them, as with the Beatles, it allows you to develop your own sound, and you're not relying on somebody else giving you tunes, so you sound like everybody else. Because there was a time period where there were a few writers writing for everybody. Motown was guilty of this. All the songs were great, but you could tell it was a Motown writing team doing it. When you have your own distinct writers for your band, AC/DC, Boston, Queen, you start realizing that these bands have their own flavors to them.
That just really helps them to develop their own unique identities, basically.
Next band, we have 87 on the list, Brother in Arms by Dire Straits. 9 million copies.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're another one of these bands. They sort of broke in the UK around 77-ish, when punk was actually sort of bulldozing everything in front of it. But Dire Straits managed to, find success. I'm one of the few bands to find success that wasn't in the punk genre. But Mark Knopfler's an important part of that band, I think. I mean, it's great. He used to be in a band called Brewer's Droop in the early 70s. Now, that might not be an expression in America, but in the UK, Brewer's Droop is associated with failings in the sort of wedding tackle area after 8 or 9 pints of beer.
After 8 or 9 pints of beer, everybody's going to do that.
Absolutely. But they're a band, and there is actually an album of material, like a lot of that sort of thing. It came out years after, because Mark Knopfler became famous in Dire Straits. But I've actually heard some of the tracks, and it's really quite good. He also played on Dylan's Slow Train Coming, and he was the second guitarist when Eric Clapton started his annual Albert Hall residencies in 1987. So, I mean, the guy's done some interesting stuff. I must just say, he's got this awesome album with Emmylou Harris called All the Road Running. Came out around 2006. So, I mean, the guy's got a heck of a pedigree.
Dire Straits was one of those bands that I'd have to really think about if I would put in the that album in particular, put it in the top 100, because it has Sultans of Swings and what's the other one, Money for Nothing. But the rest of the album never really hit home for me. Here's a place where I might have slipped in Deep Purple's Perfect Stranger.
Yeah, they would have sat a mission, I think. They've got a few albums that are at least as good as some of the ones we're talking about.
When speaking of 70s bands like that, Foreigner, Aerosmith, and Bad Company all have albums in the top 100. Foreigner, number 49.
Yeah, they've got 49.4 there. 6 million copies that one sold. Again, they're a good band, but whether or not I'm not sure I'd put that in the top half of the. Well, I suppose it's only just in the top half of the charts. Popular enough, I suppose.
Aerosmith's Toys in the Attic might have been even higher up, because at 73, I think they're getting ripped off a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, Aerosmith have done some great music over the years, and they've been very successful over a long period of time as well.
Bad Company at 93, their debut album. That's another great album that at 93, I feel like they're being gypped a little. I would have put that around 75 or so.
Yeah, I definitely have had that higher. I think Paul Rodgers is one of these really interesting guys. I mean, he started off in Free, and he's one of these guys that's toured with Queen as well in the past. I think he might have been the first of the the guys to tour with Queen.
You know, the thing is that Paul Rodgers seems to be underrated. Everybody recognizes he's a great singer, but when you start listing off great singers, he's always down on the list, and he shouldn't be, because the dude is perfect in his key every time. At this age, I just heard something from a few years back, a live gig, and I'm like, he sounds like he was sounding like he was in 70.
Yeah. I mean, I'd agree that he is one of the seriously underestimated singers. But I mean, Bad Company, look at the pedigree. I mean, Simon Kirke as well as Paul came from Free. Mick Ralphs came from Mott the Hoople, and Buzz Buddle came from King Crimson. I mean, all superb bands. I remember seeing Mott the Hoople live, and they're one of these bands that were awesome live and never really quite captured it on record.
Foreigner, they're the only ones on tour.
They're the only one of the band on tour, although Paul Rodgers is actually on tour in America and Canada as well. Paul Rodgers is there 18th of July to 29th of December, and Foreigner, they're around about. They're doing playing America, then Australia and New Zealand, 20th of June to the 1st of November.
Then we have John Mellencamp at 74 with Scarecrow. Again, it's a great album. Maybe ranked about where it should be. Maybe it should be a little lower.
He's interesting, though, because he sort of started out calling himself Johnny Cougar in the mid-'70s before he decided to become John Mellencamp.
Yeah, he went through a couple of changes. He was Johnny Cougar, then John Cougar Mellencamp, then John Mel. I mean... If you're looking for his albums, you got to be very well diverse in his name so you can get all his albums.
Exactly. He's a good guy, though. I mean, it's some great music.
It's very good American style music, Little Pink Houses and all that. All those songs from John Cougar, they can resonate with people because he talks about everyday life. Number 80, we have Heart album, 1985.
Yeah, it's not an album I'd have in the top 100, I don't think.
No, if there's some earlier albums with Magic Man and Barracuda that probably should be ranked a little higher, but it did sell 5 million copies.
Well, that's absolutely. Again, 2 years on the charts, so it's obviously a very popular album.
And we have maybe arguably the most popular 80s and 90s band, U2, with Unforgettable Fire in 1984, selling 3 million copies.
Yeah. So it's interesting how, 3 million's a lot of copies, but when you look at the numbers sold for everybody else, I mean, it's not a particular high number, and it's the only one of their albums that actually makes it into the charts. But if you think about how successful they've been across the 80s, particularly in the 90s, I certainly would have really expected to have seen more U2 represented.
It may be the fact that they didn't have complete albums from back to front, but every album they put out had 3 or 4 really good songs.
Yeah. And that's probably what marks out a lot of these albums, is that they're consistently good. I mean, someone like Meatloaf with Bat Out of Hell, I mean, it's a one-off album, but from beginning to end, it's just got great songs.
U2's on tour as well.
That's right. I mean, they're all over the place for most of the rest of this year. 21st of June to the 10th of November. America, Germany, France, Portugal, Spain, Denmark, Netherlands, Italy, and then over to the UK and Ireland to round it off. Finishing off in Ireland, as you'd expect.
Yep.
Smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Because the John LeBang Show will be right back.
After this.
That's guaranteed. Yes.
Pane in the Glass, commercial and residential window cleaning for a beautiful sparkling shine that's crystal clear. Call Pane in the Glass Window Cleaning. You can find them on Facebook at Pane in the Glass.
Hey, man, you're listening to the John LeBang Show, man.
That's good, because that means you ain't stupid.
Singer-songwriters that have albums in the top 100. The one that catches me the most is number 22, Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill. 16 million copies. I had no idea she sold that many copies of that album.
No, absolutely. I mean, that in that particular section we've got there, I mean, that is far and away the biggest. You look at James Taylor at 97, he'd only sold 3 million. So that's an enormous. I mean, that album does have Ironic on it, which is possibly one of her better known songs, but it's a colossal number.
Carole King in 71 sold 10 million copies of Tapestry, and that's at 26. You can't argue with 10 million copies, especially at the time.
Yeah. I mean, she is one of the major songwriters across the sort of 60s and 70s particularly. She wrote a whole... I mean, she wrote with her husband at the time. I think they got divorced, Goffin and King. But, I mean, she wrote for everybody. I mean, she wrote a lot of the Phil Spector stuff, a lot of stuff for Elvis, Drifters. And she's had so many hit singles that she's either written on her own or written with Jerry Goffin.
Stevie Wonder, which actually I would have put higher on the list, Songs in the Key of Life. I think he's lowballed there. That might be a top 50 album.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very highly rated album. It's generally thought to be far and away his best album. But yeah, absolutely, I'd have thought that would have been a lot higher. And Jackson Browne's Run on Empty as well at 60. I think that's a superb album. I really like Jackson Browne. I mean, the fact that there's no Bob Dylan in this chart is unbelievable. Yep. I suppose one of the problems could be that he's just got so many good ones. I mean, Blonde on Blonde. Yep. I think separately, I think I might just check out the overall sales of Dylan's albums. I mean, he's consistent. I mean, the guy's been around since the very early 60s, and he's still successful. He was just made poet laureate or something. And
he's one of those guys that influenced the Beatles and other artists, and a lot of people don't know that.
But the whole folk rock thing, it was the Byrds that covered a lot of his songs as their early singles, and when Dylan was moving across from acoustic to electric stuff, and it was the same sort of time that the Byrds were covering his albums.
So we're going to rush through these next ones because I want to get to your top albums that weren't on the list that you think should be there, and I'd like to get to mine, but we got a little bit more to cover here real quick. These are the artists like in the 80s and like early 90s that made the top 100, like Nirvana's Nevermind, even though 14 might be a little high. I mean, 10 million copies. And then Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. I remember when that came out. At number 28, it sold 12 million copies, which is just amazing for what you would consider the poppier side of that 80s rock metal stuff. But the band that this album, Appetite for Destruction, Guns N' Roses, 18 million copies. I have to say, Derek, I would have put this one in my top 20. I know it's 23, but what a great album that one is.
Absolutely.
Guns N' Roses is on tour all over the place, and Bon Jovi's on tour.
Yeah, I mean, Guns N' Roses, I mean, this is a serious tour. Belgium, Germany, France, Spain, Netherlands, Poland, Russia, Estonia, Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Indonesia, Philippines, Malaysia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, even the UAE, United Arab Emirates, and South Africa. And all that goes on, believe it or not, between the 21st of June and the 29th of November.
Shoo.
So that's another one where the roadies are going to earn their money, I think. Well, and Bon Jovi's in Australia for a week in December 1st to the 8th.
Just your thoughts on Prince and Madonna in basically the 80s there with Purple Rain, Like a Virgin in 1999?
Well, I've never ever been a Madonna fan at all. I've never really been a big Prince fan, but I can understand why his music is really popular. But I've never ever seen the attraction of Madonna, I must say.
Now, 80s metal, you have this little section here. It has Metallica, their self-titled album, 17, great album, little high on the list in my opinion. Alice in Chains' Dirt for sure. is in the top 100. But the one that's missing from here, Derek, is Master of Puppets by Metallica. To me, that's their best album, and it didn't even make the top 100.
No, it's surprising, and I think it's one of those things there where well, I suppose it depends how many it sold as to how it would have sort of fitted into the algorithm. But I guess it just boils down to different tastes.
Beastie Boys, Licensed to Ill at 38. 9 Inch Nails. He is still popular, and that was also an album that, even though it had like heavy metal influences, it also had like techno influences. It had all kinds of different little mixes in the album, which 4 million copies. When you compare it to some of these others, you think it's not that many, but I mean, for a one-off album, 4 million copies is no slouch. Absolutely. Got REM, Out of Time, Soundgarden, Super Unknown. We'll get to that. That's at 90. I would have put another album ahead of that one. And then Tears for Fears. I remember how popular these guys were. Songs from the Big Chair, number 91.
Yeah.
I want to mention that 10 by Pearl Jam at number 20. Great album from front to back. That definitely is a place about where you should put it. Stone Temple Pilots surprised me. Even though the album Core was good, I didn't think they would make the list. But the big surprises, and I think you're going to agree with me, Weezer's Weezer album. Absolutely. It shouldn't even make the top 100, in my opinion.
Gosh, no, absolutely no. Not when you think, but what isn't there?
And then Coldplay, A Rush of Blood to the Head. Another, the younger generation likes them, but I've heard the album, and that's the most recent one on the list, I think, right? 2002? Yeah. It doesn't compare to some of the albums that we're going to talk about next.
No, absolutely not. Absolutely. You can catch Pearl Jam on tour.
Yep.
In Europe and America, 29th of April to 8th of July.
Yeah, and they're a great band. If you haven't seen them, they're well worth going to see because their album, their live show sounds just like the album.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to our list. I want you to go first, Derek, because I've dominated the talking here for so long. Tell us some of the albums that you think should be on the list.
Well, I think there are none on the list from the 50s, and there are a couple that I would have had on there, although they wouldn't have sold in the kind of quantities that these albums sold in. I mean, Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, Miles Davis is one of those guys he's jazz trumpeter, modern jazz, but he's so influential. I mean, he was at the Isle of Wight 1970, and lots of rock and roll guys suggest how influential he was on them. And the other one I'd have said from the 50s would have been perhaps Carl Perkins. His son album was called Dance Album Of, and 3 of those songs were covered by the Beatles. Honey Don't, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and Matchbox, and Elvis covered Blue Suede Shoes. So all in all, that is a pretty influential album to say the least. Mm-hmm. But again, nobody bought albums in those days as well. That was a time when everybody bought singles. So you can imagine that these albums would never have got into a chart like this based around sales.
It's interesting that the music industry has come full circle because we're back to singles now.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really has, which is probably why there are only 2 bands that were formed after 1999 who made the cut. And with all the downloads, people sort of just create their own albums, as it were.
You have Otis Redding next.
Oh, Otis Redding. Otis Blue, which is a superb album from 1965. It's got tracks like Shake, Respect, I've Been Loving You Too Long on it. It's just a fabulous album. It would have been nice to have seen that, because there's not a lot of soul music in there. You mentioned Motown earlier, and people like Holland Dozier Holland, who wrote a vast number of the songs there. Because it was a great 60s Motown, and Atlantic was a great era for music. But moving on to Jefferson Airplane, Surrealistic Pillow, that was at the same sort of time as that Doors first album that did make the cut. But this was the album that had White Rabbit and Somebody to Love On.
Find somebody to love. Oh,
it's a brilliant song and a good rendition there, John.
I try, my friend. I try. You know, we got to give the people a little singing here.
An album that really should have been on there, I think. I was surprised wasn't. Was the Velvet Underground's debut album, The Velvet Underground and Nico. That's the one with the banana, peel the banana sleeve. Another Warhol creation. And that's got like I'm Waiting for the Man, Heroin, All Tomorrow's Parties. Absolutely amazing album and groundbreaking. I mean, you know, there was 67 was interesting because you had the sort of Jefferson Airplane and Doors on the West Coast, and then you had the Velvet Underground creating the whole scene in the on the East Coast. And Marvin Gaye, his album What's Going On, a very, very highly rated album, you know, critically particularly. It's got things, as well as the title track, things like Mercy, Mercy Me and What's Happening, Brother on it from 1971. I was surprised not to see that. If I had to think of any sort of soul album that I would have expected to have seen there, that would have been even though I prefer the Otis Blue, that's the one I really would have expected to have seen there. And one of the others I absolutely adore is Ace of Spades, Motorhead. I just think that's such a great album. There's a track on it called We're the Road Crew, sort of life on the road. I just love that album. But I wasn't surprised it wasn't there. But a couple of people with so many good albums. Frank Zappa, I'm a big personal fan of. I can understand why he didn't feature on it, because his albums wouldn't sell in those sort of quantities, and he's got so many great albums. There's not sort of one classic Frank Zappa album, and the same with Elvis. He had three distinct careers: 50s rock and roller, 1960s matinee idol with his 31 movies, and then 70s the ultimate cabaret act. And again, his first album, rock and roll, well, it's called Elvis Presley. It wouldn't have sold anything like the numbers to get in there. But again, you think, after the Beatles, he's arguably the greatest rock and roll icon. And he didn't make the cut.
Yeah, that's very interesting that Elvis Presley didn't even have one single representation in the top 100 when he's considered to be, like you said, one of the most popular music icons of all time. Frank Zappa, again, I'm going to agree with you on this, because Frank Zappa, if you talk to guitar players, he's considered to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest guitar player ever. And he doesn't have an album up there.
No. Something like Bongo Fury with Captain Beefheart or Hot Rats, absolute classic albums.
Yep. So I'm going to get my 10, and we've talked about a few of them here because we're running so out of time here. AC/DC Highway to Hell, I brought that up. I think that should definitely be on the list. Black Sabbath Volume 4, that album, if you haven't heard it, grab it, listen to it. I think that was Black Sabbath at their best. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Blood Sugar Sex Magic. Maybe that holds a special place in my heart because I was moving from Detroit to Seattle at the time, and that was pretty much the only CD we had in the car. I brought up Black Ice by AC/DC. Van Halen 1984, Jump, Drop Dead Legs, I'll Wait, Hot for Teacher. I'm surprised that didn't make the list. That should have been easily in the top 100. Another one of my personal favorites, Queensryche, Operation Mindcrime. Whitesnake Slide It In, The Cult, Sonic Temple. We couldn't even fit it all in, Derek.
Well, that's not bad going, is it?
2 hours and we probably left 20 albums or so on the table that we just won't be able to talk about. Thank you again so much, my friend, for joining me, being a part of this broadcast.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it, John. It's been great fun. Oh, just one more omission. No Jimi Hendrix.
You're damn right. No Jimi Hendrix. We could go on for hours about this.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Derek. We'll catch you next month. and talk to you soon, all right?
3,
Cheers, John. My pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
we have liftoff. Tune in again next week. Same time,